So ayan na hearing ng Economist ni Pbbm ang mahiwagang bertod na si Arsenio balisacan. Hearing nito sa pagkakatalaga sa Neda, isa-isa sinagot ang katanungan ng mga senador at congressman tungkol sa Maharlika Wealth Funds, tinalakay sa hearing ang mga plano at mga posibilidad na mangyari kapag natuloy ang Maharlika Funds ni Pbbm, kahit na uutal si balisacan ay nasasagot naman ng maayos ang mga binibatong katanungan bilang Economist nito ni Pbbm. Panoorin natin ang ibang pang detalye.
Yeah, I'd like to put on record that I support Secretary Balisacan. No, just like some clarifications because you're part of the economic team, Secretary. The president yesterday said that it was his idea regarding the Maharlika Investment Fund, and the people should give it a try. And it's really up to Congress to come up with a bill acceptable to the people with the proper safeguards. Personally, I support the Malacanang Wealth Fund, Investment Fund. But most recently, Raul Fabella, an economist, said that it's beyond repair. I totally disagree with him because I believe that everything can be repaired with the right mindset. I was just awaiting for the statement of the Neda secretary to at least defend the statement of the president. Sir, maybe you have the floor. Maybe we can give, you can put a few minutes of your time. Are you in full support of the Maharlika Investment Fund, Mr. Secretary?
We are in full support, Your Honor. In fact, the recent statement of read by Secretary Benjokno was a joint statement among us in the cabinet, in the economic team. So that's an expression of our full commitment to the
Thank you for hearing that because I think we should give it a try. I just like to give you the chance to just counter. What is your comment on Raul Fabella's statement that it's beyond repair? As one of the member of the economic team.
Well, as a member of the economic profession, Your Honor, I respect his view, but my view also, personal view, if that's allowed, is that laws that you passed, the Congress passed, are good or bad, depending on how you make it. And governance is key to that. The governance framework that you put into the law, it's what makes it workable or not workable. So that's why I think that having that proposal to Congress will allow us to debate the merits of the proposal and put the appropriate assurance that it will work. So it's all about the design and the framework that you put into that law, Your Honor. So in short, it can work and it must work if it's designed properly as it should.
In a few words lang, Secretary, the public is listening. Majority of senators are here. Members of Congress are here. Why should we support the Maharlika Wealth Fund? Personally, I want to support it, but we want to hear from you. You're one of the members of the economic team. In a few words, why should we support it?
Mr. Majority Leader, if I may also add a point to the same topic. When we debate something in Congress, we rely on expert advice from the different departments as well as stakeholders. So if you were to look at this, and we were going to ask you personally, not as a collective decision of the economic team, what are the good points based on what you've read? What are the bad points that needs to be amended?
Okay,
Before you proceed, I would like to acknowledge Senator Grace po, sorry.
Mr. Chair, with all due respect to my good friend, Senator Grace, I think before he answers the very good suggestion or question of Senator Grace. I will wrap up. I just want the public to hear, through you, Mr. Secretary, why majority of Congress, majority of senators, if ever, should support the Maharlika Wealth Fund. Personally, I support it, but we want to hear from you as one of the members of the economic team. Maybe you can articulate in a few words before you answer Senator Gray's questioning.
Well, I believe, Your Honor, that that it has the potential of attracting funds into the and that are otherwise not used in a way that that addresses the immediate concerns and priorities of for national development. And if that fund could supplement the limited fiscal resources that we have. For example, it could be used to improve the attractiveness of PPP projects, particularly for critical areas like infrastructure. But then again, as pointed out by several observers, its potential depends so much on how we design the framework. I must admit that in the beginning, when this was brought to my attention, I was not an expert on sovereign funds, and I had to, just like the rest of you, I suppose, I would have to read on my own and ask my staff to research on that thing, and on that basis, we could form our own decision on whether to support or not to support
Actually, just share, sometimes it's not the message, it's the messenger. So my point really is, if no, he's the member of the economic team, madam. So what my question is, if let's just say for the sake of argument that it was approved today, X billions, what would be the first investment the Maharlika Investment Fund will put into that will, magkaroon ng bagong pag-asa sa Pilipino? I think that once you answer that, I think the negative issues will be erased.
Well,
I'm here to help you. I just want the public listening now. If you have 100 billion pesos today, granted by Congress, where will you put it? That's just because you have to answer this. Because while we are in support of this, not everyone here, I'm just speaking for myself, no? But for example, in the BGC, that used to be owned by government. It was privatized, sold. Can you imagine if the government retained even 10%? It's almost 1 million pesos now. The government could have made money and they could have reinvested it in hospitals, in roads. That's what I'm saying. That's why I believe in an investment fund. Like the Temasek of Singapore and others. But what I'm saying is, if you have 100 billion pesos today, granted by Congress, where should the government put it that will guarantee good returns for the Filipino people?
I would recommend that funds be prioritized for those critical development programs and projects that we have identified in the 8-point agenda and the Philippine Economic Development.
Can you cite at least three programs?
Infrastructure, for example, we have a very huge gaps, shortfalls in our infrastructure development. There are many viable, many profitable.
Can you be more specific? Yes, I'll wrap up. We are
Railways, for example, Your Honor, railways, the President has already announced that railways and mass transit are high priorities.
Mr. Chair, I'm
we can
sorry.
start with that.
These projects that you're mentioning are long-term, huh? You're putting in the money, but that's not necessarily going to be earning. In fact, maybe at the start, the government will even subsidize. So in terms of the fund and the interest that's going to be made out of it, or the dividends, you're not going to see that if you're going to put it in, let's say, infrastructure. I'm just saying that's my analysis. Am I wrong? Let's say, okay, you fund the Metro Manila subway. That's good. Normally, that comes from GAA. Okay? Pero kung sa inyo, kailan natin makukuha yung dividends nun?
Before we proceed, Secretary Balisacan, I would like to acknowledge the presence of Minority Floor Leader, Senator Alan Peter Compañero Cayetano, sir. So you may answer, Mr. Secretary.
Yes, I'd like to see that the investments in the Maharlika would be for long-term investments, Your Honor, like infrastructure, investments for agriculture, investments for our even for hospitals and health services. I think that's where the longer term returns are coming from. It's not. I suspect that if those funds are going to be invested in areas where those are not identified as critical for our economic development at the moment, then maybe that doesn't serve the purpose as I see it. But if these funds are used to augment the very limited fiscal space that we have now, to meet our development priorities, then I'm all for it, and that's what I was paid to understand. That's what those funds are.
So, Mr. Chairman, for example, you invest in rail. That's good, and I'm all for that. Okay, that's a long-term development. It's a long-term fund, but the benefits that you're going to get there, better infrastructure, better tourism, better connectivity, that's all good. But that's all like, what do you call this? The consequence of this infrastructure. But directly to the fund itself. Normally, what's the practice of, let's say, Temasek Foundation or the ones from Norway? Where do they put their money? Do they invest in an actual fund already that's existing? Let's say, I'm sorry, I'm not also an economic person, but let's say Berkshire Hathaway, okay? Yung mga ganong klaseng fund, or a startup that really has a direct dividend that will come in. Is that part of the consideration?
Yeah, I suspect that I don't know how the management is going to be structured in the fund, and particularly the management of risk. But I suspect that for the fund to be sustainable, that there is a good diversified portfolio there. That's a good mix of long-term and short-term, Your Honor, so that the returns to the funds are high. But still, I would like to see that those projects, priority projects, are for the long-term development of.
Mr. Chair, I just want to be sure about this. I know that in the version of the House, if I'm not mistaken, there's a penalty for those who will misuse the fund or will be negligent about the fund. What we're trying to be careful here, ang nag-iingat tayo, hindi mapolitika halimbawa yung fund na yan na ibibigay sa mga malalapit na tao, halimbawa, may kilala lang dun sa board member at dun mapupunta. Kasi ilang beses, like, I think meron tayo sa National Steel Corporation, yung mga dati na misuse yung fund natin, na nalugi tayo doon, hindi tayo nakakolekta. So yun yung importante, na talaga yung vetting process ay maayos, hindi lang dahil kakilala yan, diyan natin ilagay. So talagang dapat merong moral ascendancy lahat ng mga nasa board. Yun lang po. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If I may, Your Honor, I completely agree with that. That's why I kept on saying that it depends on how it really boils down to the governance structure that we'll put into the law, Your Honor.
Mr. Chair, just as a wrap up, I support Secretary Balikasan. I support the Maharlika Investment Fund. But again, it's incumbent upon you, Secretary, to please clarify specific concerns of our people. When the president said, give it a try, we are all up for it. There's no harm in trying as long as the proper safeguards are there. At the end of the day, it's up to Congress to really come out with a good measure. I think the House is currently deliberating on this, and hopefully when we pass it to the Senate, the refinements are already there. But I think the best way to perfect a law is ongoing debate and continuous data to be provided by Neda on why this is important for our people.
Actually po, at magandang hapon po, Sec. RC. Actually, yung akin interjection sana dun sa line of questioning din ni Majo. Kasi po, Sec, Mr. Chair, nung sinasagot niyo yung mga tanong ng mga colleagues namin, may nasabi kayo about the Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund na this is what you were made to understand about the Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund. Meron na pong at least siguro kalahating dosen ng mga dating NEDA secretary who think that the Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund is a bad idea. Yung isa po sa kanila, si dating NEDA Secretary Esguera, sabi niya maraming pag-uusap tungkol sa mga safeguards tungkol dito sa Maharlika Fund. Pero bago pa yung safeguard, yung rationale for setting up such a sovereign wealth fund, hindi pa yon na-establish. Bagamat may mga ilang kasama kami sa Kongreso who say na yung ideya ng sovereign wealth fund na ito galing sa economic manager. So, Sec, sa inyo ba talaga nanggaling yung ideya ng Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund na ito? Kasi prior this afternoon, you've been very silent about it. Sa inyo po ba talaga nanggaling? Sa economic team po.
Well, let me
Continue, Mr. Secretary, I would like to
Mr. Chair.
acknowledge the presence of Senator Chis Escudero. You may now proceed.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yes, ma'am. Let me recall what I know about this the fund.
What you know about it po?
Well, yes.
So, hindi po ba nanggaling
Well,
sa inyo?
the president has mentioned last night that the idea came from him, and then it was toasted to the members of the economic team. And the technical group was formed among the members of the economic agencies. They drafted something. They presented to the cabinet, to the economic team for discussion, and it's then that I became aware of what this full fund, this fund in much more detail. But as I said, I'm not an expert on this, and so I had to also research on my own, do my own reading on this thing, and that's why I said that in the end it's going to be a good thing or a bad thing, depending on how we frame it, and we develop the governance institution infrastructure of the fund. And there it's this whole business of independence of the management of the fund comes into play, and among other things, so including the management of risk.
So yun na nga po, Sec. Whether it turns out to be a good thing or a bad thing, hanggang ngayon, karamihan din po sa amin hindi expert dito, kaya kami po nagtatanong nito. And, let me just say na if two agencies, for example, Bangko Sentral and DOF, disagree about a Maharlika Sovereign Wealth Fund, then I would wait for Neda's view on the matter. Sabi niyo po kanina, tinos ito sa inyo. Ideya ni Presidente, tinos ito, so parang sinalo nyo lang. And ngayon we're at this stage. Did Neda formulate even just one section of this Maharlika bill that is now filed in Congress?
We would like to see it at that point, Your Honor, that it is a group effort, output because we all signed up at the end, and we discussed it among ourselves, and at that point it became a collective.
So it's a group bill. But
Yeah.
yung ambag po ba ng NEDA, meron ba dyan na kahit isang section na galing po sa inyo? Or if kung hindi, saan nanggaling yung bill? Yung draft?
We were part of the technical group.
Yung PWG.
Your Honor, I'm not aware now which what word or what sentence was Neda's part, but yeah, in the end, when it came to us, that's when we asked at the level of the cabinet, of the members of the economic team, that we agreed to support the whole thing.
Just as my last interjection at this point, Mr. Chair, Sec, ako I would rather po na alam nung isang body, kunyari yung government economic managers sa isang group project tulad ng isang bill o isang sovereign wealth fund, kung kani-kanino nanggaling yung bawat feature o section. I rather prefer na yung mga executive agencies natin very jealous and watchful sa kani-kaniyang kumbaga baby sa loob ng group project na ito. Para masigurado natin na in that push and pull, in that debate, really the best version of an idea will come out. Mapag-alaman nyo that as half dozen former NEDA secretaries think it's a bad idea, kayo na rin po magpapayo sa amin na abandon that, pursue other tracks. Kasi in line with what another colleague was mentioning earlier, ayaw po natin mangyari na yung NEDA, napakataas na agency para po sa amin sa ating gobyerno, ay magsilbing, well, deodorant lang ng mga polisiyang galing kahit saan, kahit pag galing sa Malacanang. Mataas po ang tingin natin sa NEDA, SEC, Mr. Chair. Mataas din personally ang tingin ko kay SEC, RC, ever since, kahit na nung laban natin para sa reproductive health law. At aasahan po natin sa inyo yung matalinong pag-aaral at balansyadong pagtimbang sa mga alternatibong polisiya, upang kahit po ang Malacanang ay maliwanagan. So, salamat po, Sec, at maraming salamat, Mr. Chair, at this point.
Senator Cayetano, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and belatedly may I also thank the chairperson dun sa DOTR for the opportunity last time. No? Chair, dalawang topics lang, no? Una dun nga sa investments, magandang hapon, Secretary. No? Una dun nga sa Maharlika Fund, no? Maybe because it's a hot issue, but also I'd like to take advantage na si Secretary po spent a lifetime on studies on poverty, on wealth distribution, on equity. And isa sa pinakamalaking problema ng Pilipinas talaga yan, di ba, na usually our future is determined to whom and where we were born. If you were born in Tawi-Tawi or in Batanes, if you were born to a Juan de la Cruz or Juan Santos compared to a crazy rich Asian na binabanggit sa akin ni Senator Grace, yung parang kung saan ka pinanganak at kanino ka pinanganak really determines your future in the Philippines, no? Itong mga studies ni Secretary are long-term, and when we talk about the Maharlika Fund, sumisentro tayo doon. So, you would agree siguro, Secretary, that sentiment is also such a big thing when it comes to the stock market and to funds, no? Yung sentiment at saka ngayon na maraming bullish pero marami din pong negative sentiments on this. Ang daming nagdududa kung ano talaga ang intention dito kahit maganda yung intention. So, let me throw an idea your way. Tama yung majority leader that both houses naman will discuss this. But kung makikita mo, for example, yung Skyway, Avitex, yung mga highway papunta sa norte, so far wala nakikitang nalulugi sa mga projects na yan, sa mga huge infra projects na yan, no? And this is purely driven by the private sector. Pero kung hindi nalulugi, malaki yung returns, then why not get Juan de la Cruz into that projects? So instead of getting money from SSS and GSIS and Pag-ibig, for example, na napakalaki ng mga investable funds, why not have a platform where they can invest in these projects and get a board seat? So halimbawa kung gagawin natin na lahat ng mga projects na to, whether PPP, whether we bid it out, or whether yan ay unsolicited, let's say 10% or 20% will be funded by a GOCC. And yan project naman yan ay will be vetted by the private sector, it will be run by the private sector, but since sigurado yung returns niya or halos sigurado as can be, no? Then you will have the same result ng Maharlika wealth fund or sovereign fund, but you will have the safeguards that have been the test of time, di ba? Sa SSS, GSIS. Kita nyo ang publiko, wala namang problema pag sinabi mo SSS o GSIS mag-invest. For as long as it passes the stringent test and way that the SSS and GSIS has over the 50 years or so being investing, no? So kung ang intention is to unlock, kasi pag tinignan mo katulad ng Pag-ibig talaga no? Pag sinabing love is the answer, pag tinignan mo yung Pag-ibig fund, napakalaki. I think konting membro lang ang gumagamit talaga nito. So I'm one of those who are saying na why not unlock, no, that resources. If you look at the Aquino time, grabe po yung paglaki ng stocks, ng stock market prices po ng biggest corporations in the Philippines, whether it's Ayala, SM, Villar, etc. No? Pero kung titignan mo yung income ng SSS at GSIS, malayo doon sa stock market because of certain, siguro, how can you describe, certain safety valves or reasons, no, or conservative approach, or baka tama yung time pag-buy, hindi tama yung pag-sell or whatever, no? But the point ko, Sec, the money is there, and these projects I've mentioned and the projects that we want to do, walang talo eh. Halos guaranteed yung returns niya, no? So that's the first point that I just wanted to throw your way for consideration. No?
Your Honor, if I may
Answer, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, I think what the good senators just described is very much in the spirit of my advocacy, Your Honor, to open up more opportunities, investment opportunities for low-income households, low-income earners, and inclusive finance, inclusive investment is key to that. So I think that we need to open up avenues for investments that, especially those that affect small savers. No, I think that will go a long way in reducing the bad effects of high inequality, and eventually in the longer term, we reduce that level of inequality. Because to be honest, Your Honors, I'm very bothered by our high level of inequality, because we do know from our understanding of the economic history that eventually that high inequality will backfire in terms of our capacity to sustain a high level of economic growth. So we need to improve the access to opportunities of the large majority of our people, and inclusive finance is one of those access to opportunities that we need to open up.
To just conclude that point, Secretary, kasi while it's true na yung investments are long-term, yung infrastructure project, immediate, di ba? Kasi as soon as the money is in, yung construction, so may umiikot na pera doon. As soon as na mabuksan yung kalye, there's less insurgency usually there, roads rather than bullets talaga, di ba? And then, of course, halimbawa sa tourism, napakagaganda ng mga lugar all around the country, pero wala nang infra papunta doon, no? So ang point, we might not be able to equalize yung sweldo, resources, investments, but just try to create more opportunities for all Filipinos. And maybe, halimbawa, the sovereign wealth fund can be funded from the private sector, meaning lahat ng supporters ng administrasyon, you want to put in your money and long-term to, then this group will run it. But as far as the short-term, if you can get really the SSS, GSIS, Pag-ibig, Land Bank, to use some of its investable funds, hindi yung hindi investable, but its investable funds for this infrastructure program, baka win-win-win siya, no? So I'll leave it there, Secretary, because other senators, like my good friend Senator Escudero, wants to ask some questions there. Just one more point, mas pang long-term to, no? But, well, my seatmate and I have been in Congress since 1998. So mahaba-haba na rin, 24? So next year, 25 years na kami na sa Kongreso. And parati po kaming may tanong kasi sa 1987 Constitution, while it is true that the government cannot borrow without the Monetary Board approval, it also says that not a single peso or centavo can be spent without Congress appropriating it. But napansin ko, ang gagawin ng gobyerno, mangungutang, let's say kung sa Japanese or Chinese or sa Koreans or sa Australians, and then by the time na nasa GAA siya, eto yung pagsinisingil na. Tapos na yung grace period. No? So, what happens is that we're forced to approve the loan because if we go against the loan at any time before that, most of the loans ngayon may arbitration clause na rin eh. So in a way, no, I mean, bringing the argument to the absurd, di ba, yung argumentum ad absurdum for our dear colleagues, no? For example, we disapproved 10 billion of swimming pools to be created all around the country. Actually, the executive department can go to Japan or China and borrow 10 billion for swimming pools, then have a 2-year grace period, and then 2 years from now or 3 years from now, nandun pa lang sa GAA, and bringing it to the absurd. So halimbawa ang DPWH, if suddenly their whole budget is maintenance, wala nang new roads, for example, binago natin sa Congress, ginawa natin panay new roads. Theoretically, they can move to zero the DPWH budget of 800 billion, and theoretically, they can borrow 800 billion, and then 2-3 years from now, sigurado na yung approval eh, no? So, I know this is more legal than economic, and the argument that, you know, when you have a good admin, there's not enough to borrow. When you have a bad administration, kahit piso, dapat hindi mo utangin. So I'm aware of that. But since you're a person who've always looked long-term and you had the privilege of being the Neda secretary of the biggest political rivalry in the country, no? The Aquinos and for the Marcoses. So this is something I just wanted to put on your desk and to think about them, and for Congress to also consider, no? Kasi tingin ko hindi masyadong magandang practice na bawat 5 we scrutinize pag nag-appropriate tayo, but the executive can actually borrow only and spend it, and we're forced to approve it later on. No? It's up to you, Sec, if you want to comment or study it muna. There's a lot of opportunities to discuss naman that issue. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much.
Senator Cheese Cordero, you're now recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At the outset, I'd like to state that I support the confirmation of Secretary Balisacan, but just some policy issues so that it can be placed on record and the public may be made aware as well of the position and direction of the Marcos administration, headed by its chief economic planner, of course. On the Maharlika fund, sir, tinanggal na ng Kongreso as of now ang GSIS at SSS as a source of fund, and GSIS is supposed to be the biggest funder initially as planned at 125 billion. So, your thoughts, sir? Saan kukunin yung pera at pondo sa ngayon kung hindi kasama ang GSIS at SSS? So, I'll be more specific. Are you in favor of utilizing our gross international reserves as Neda?
No, Your Honor, but I think the what we are thinking is the dividends, because that's the dividends that were remitted to the national government anyway,
The dividends from the Bangko Sentral.
from the Bangko Central.
But we still owe the Bangko Sentral. In fact,
Yeah.
part of the unappropriated funds includes a 10 or 50 billion fund in order to capitalize the Bangko Sentral. So, I mean, one. Two, are you in favor of lowering the reserve requirement of banks and allowing banks to, if at all, invest? Because we have one of the highest in the world. I think a reserve requirement for private banks is at 12.2%. America is at 0. Europe is at 1%. Kaya ang hirap mag-withdraw ng pera sa Amerika. So, as Neda, are you in favor of utilizing the lowering the reserves of banks and opening up that money held by banks to be invested in the Maharlika Fund?
I think reserve requirement, Your Honor, so far as I remember, my macroeconomics is part of the tools, macroeconomic tools of Bangko Sentral, of the central bank.
Again, sir, as I said, America has zero reserve requirement for banks. Europe, as a general, EU, has a 1% reserve requirement for their banks.
Yeah,
So you're not in favor of it too?
And I am not saying that I'm not in favor, you know, but I guess it depends on what you are trying. For example, if now that you have high inflation, and if you believe that it's partly because of the high liquidity.
Over-liquidity.
Yeah, that's one instrument that you can. I would not want Bangko Sentral to lose that part of the instruments, Your Honor.
I completely agree, sir. Third, DBP and Land Bank hasn't been removed from the list in the proposed bill. But there are Bangko Sentral regulations that any bank, whether DBP, Land Bank, or any bank, cannot put all of their eggs in one basket. Will these two banks filling in the gap of the supposed investment of GSIS and SSS, would you favor that the limitations on putting the money of banks into one basket be set aside in order to put up the Maharlika Fund?
I don't think that is a good idea, Your Honor. As again, the portfolio of the bank has to be diversified enough to allow it to absorb.
So that they would be immune from shocks in one sector.
Exactly.
I agree, sir.
But I think that what the fund could do is to diversify its possible sources of.
The Maharlika Fund can do that, sir.
Yeah.
But it's not advisable for either DBP or Land Bank to put such a huge amount in the Maharlika Fund, right?
And not to the extent that it's overexposed.
Exactly.
Yeah. So it has to manage its portfolio too, Your Honor.
As my final question on this, so as Neda, where would you recommend that we get the 250 billion that is being targeted to come up with this Maharlika Fund? Saan natin kukunin?
I think we have to build it over time. I don't, for example, I was just throwing up some ideas, for example, you know, I was told by.
So I won't belabor the point. So we have to build it over time, I agree. Now, there's another proposal. Put in 25 billion from the GAA in this fund and let the Maharlika Corporation invest it. But isn't it better to spend the 25 billion to actually build the bridge already today than to put the 25 billion, invest it in a fund, and hopefully it will earn? And then you get the dividends and the percentage a year or 3 years or 5 years after?
It depends on, I guess, on where you are getting that from, what part of your
Exactly.
the GAA.
It's a zero-sum game, sir. May mabawasan kang budget ng department.
Obviously, yes, sir.
I'll leave that as it is, Secretary. I hope they can come up with, the economic team can come up with a more comprehensive plan on how to present it to Congress for its consideration. My second point, Mr. Chairman, is I discussed this with Secretary Balisacan earlier, is BRICS. BRICS stands for the first letter of the 5 countries that initially set it up: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And apparently Saudi Arabia is applying. And when Saudi Arabia goes, where Saudi Arabia goes, OPEC usually goes, which controls about 82% of all exports. BRICS basically believes in utilizing local currency to settle imports and exports between countries. For the longest time since World War II, the world economy and trade was governed dictated upon by the US dollar. Now, my problem with the US dollar is the US Fed dictates on what to do with the dollar based purely in their own domestic interests without any consideration whatsoever to its effect on other countries, including ours. Should the time come, Mr. Secretary, and that option is made available to us, as I told you earlier, about 23%, 22% of our imports are from China. But all importers, whether here in this room or outside, cannot settle any goods they buy from China utilizing RMB or yuan. They can only open an LC in dollars. Whatever rice we buy from Thailand, and we will be importing, according to USDA, a little less than 3 million, the biggest ever metric tons, next year in the course of the next 1 year and a half. We still have to pay Thailand using dollars. In fact, to my colleagues here or businessmen, you cannot even open a letter of credit in any other currency other than the US dollar. Would that be correct, sir? Can I open a letter of credit in Thai baht if I want to buy some rice from Thailand? Can I open a letter of credit in RMB if I want to buy something from China? Is that even possible in the Philippines right now? To your knowledge, sir.
I'm not quite sure.
It is not available, sir. Simply because we do not have enough reserves in RMB, we do not have enough reserves in baht, we do not have enough reserves in rupee, whatever it is we want to buy from other countries. But the principle behind BRICS is, you pay us in whatever you buy from us using our currency. We pay you for whatever we buy from you using your currency. It's basically getting out of the US dollar dominance of imports and exports. What is the position of Neda with respect to that? The president is going to China next year, early next year. President Xi Jinping visited Saudi Arabia, and that's precisely what he asked of from Saudi Arabia, that they settle payments with respect to Chinese exports in RMB. What if that question is asked of our president? What would be the recommendation of Neda be?
I'm not a member of the Monetary Board, Your Honor, but my view is that we should be open, and what should matter is the national interest, and that's it, as we advance our relationship with other countries. But if it is for our advantage to hold multiple currencies, so we should do that. And I don't think that that we can avoid that possibility that renminbi become an acceptable international medium of exchange.
I completely agree with you, sir. I hope that sense of openness, sana mahawa niyo po yung mga ibang opisyal, ibang miyembro ng economic team, because I think that is where the world is headed towards in the next 5 years or 3 years. And we should be ready and open to that possibility, and not simply do the same things as we have done for the past more than 70 years since the advent of World War II, when this dollar-denominated international trade was actually hoisted upon us, and we've been living under that regime for more than half a century. Thank you.
Sure. Mr. Chair, I've had a good fortune of knowing this gentleman for quite a long time, and you can see with his dedication for public service, he started government. I'd like to put this on record. He started government service in 1979 as a research assistant of the Cotton Research and Development Institute of the DA. And then he worked up his way from the ranks, a science research specialist, a cotton research undersecretary for the Department of Agriculture up to 2000 to 2001, undersecretary also for agriculture from 2021 to 2023, all the way up to Neda on May 12th of 2012 to January of 2016. And then he continued to be chairperson of the Philippine Competitive Commission from 2016 to 2022. It shows the dedication of this gentleman when it comes to public service. Not only is he dedicated, he's also well educated. He has a doctorate on economics. And this is what I like, yung Masters in Agricultural Economics, CDEM yan. College of Development Economic Management, that's my campus in UPLB. So he's also a graduate of UPLB in his masteral course. My point is, we really need people like him in government who can help steer, especially now that we have a looming global economic recession and crisis. I think he's a welcome addition to the cabinet, and if it would be best that we confirm him as soon as possible so that he may now focus on the task at hand, which is to keep the country afloat from the global, possible global economic recession. Yun lamang po, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to throw in my full support to Secretary Balisacan.
Kahit putol magsalita si Neda Secretary Arsenio Balisacan ay nasasagot naman niya ng maayos ang mga katanungan nito sa hearing tungkol sa Maharlika Wealth Funds, kahit nasabon at kasama ang shampoo ay napatunayan niya na kaya niya maging economist at kilala siya ng ibang senador at congressman. Patunay na malawak ang kanyang experience bilang itinalagang secretary ng Neda. Good luck Sir Balisacan, and sana maging positibo kapag natuloy ang investment funds ng Maharlika. Salamat sa pagsama ulit sa akin guys, mabuhay ang Pilipinas nating mahal. God bless all.